Was it weird that Adrian was paranoid when Marinette was late for school? He knew this was normal behaviour for her. It would be weirder if she was at school on time. But he was always worried something could happen on her short walk across the road to DuPont's, that an Akuma villain would attack her, or she'd get akumatized herself because she didn't want to get out of bed, or because she dreaded having to see Lila again, and by then it would be too late for Adrian to intervene and stop her from getting hurt, or stop Hawkmoth from getting her Miraculous. He knew it was silly. Marinette knew the dangers of getting akumatized, just as he did, and if a villain did attack her, she was smart enough to be able to protect herself until she could transform. But he just felt so worried when she wasn't in sight. It had only been 2 weeks since Mr. Damocles had been akumatized, and Adrian had found out Ladybug's identity, and already, Marinette had become all Adrian thought about. Maybe if she was being treated nicely at school by her so-called friends, he wouldn't be as worried, but they were being horrible when Lila was around. He couldn't stand to see her being treated like this, but Marinette was right. There was no point in saying anything. It would only make things worse. The door to the locker room swung open, and instead of it being another student Adrian didn't know the name of, it was Marinette, and he felt himself relax. She was okay. Well, she looked out of breath, but she didn't seem to look sad. "Hey girl," Alia called, acting like herself since Lila wasn't here today. "You brought your present, right?" Marinette held up the small box in her hands, then made her way over to where they were all stood at the lockers. "I almost forgot it, but yes. Today was Miss Boustier's birthday, and everyone had brought presents, apart from Chloe by the looks of things. Although Adrian was sure everyone was supposed to bring one, but this was the first time he'd ever done this, so maybe not. "Did you make something, Marinette?" Milan asked, and Adrian smiled. The class were always intrigued when she made something. Marinette opened the box, letting them all see. "I didn't have much time, so it's just a small makeup bag with a quote on it, and I bought a lip balm for her too. I'm worried it won't be good enough." "I'm sure she'll love it," Adrian told her, and Marinette smiled at him, her cheeks colouring up a pretty pink. It had only been 2 weeks since he found out she was Ladybug, and he knew he'd never get tired of knowing he could make her blush like that. She was so cute. "Thank you." "Chloe didn't bring anything," Alex said. Marinette shrugged. "Well, that's to be expected at this point." Chloe glared at Marinette. "And what's that supposed to mean, Dupanjang? We've been in the same class ever since we started school, and you've never brought a present. Why would you start now?" "Well, I... Chloe huffed and marched out of the locker room, Sabrina following. The rest of the class left too, apart from Marinette and Adrian, and he went over to her as she put the lid back on her present. "What you made really is amazing," he said as he leant against the lockers. She blushed again. "You think so?" "Definitely." Marinette didn't reply, just opened her locker and put the present inside. Was he making her too nervous? Should he just go? He didn't want to. He looked forward to seeing her at school so much, but they didn't get very many chances to talk because of class. The weekends felt like torture knowing he couldn't see her. He knew he saw her as Ladybug all the time, even on weekends when he transformed and jumped out through his window, but she was completely comfortable around him as Cat Noir. As Adrian was another story. If he didn't get many chances, he should stay and try to get her to open up to him. If he waited for Marinette to come to him, then Adrian would be waiting for the rest of his life. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she stuttered, shutting her locker. "I'm fine. Why do you ask? You seem nervous." Marinette shrugged. "Miss Boustier is an amazing teacher. I just want her to like my gift. But I'm not sure it's good enough." "Is that the only thing bothering you?" She sighed and leant against the lockers too, both of them facing each other now. "Yesterday, it was at lunch, and you'd gone home. Lila was here." Adrian immediately narrowed his eyes. "What did she do to you?" "She didn't do anything. It was what she said. She was talking to Rose in the courtyard and I walked by. She was telling her about Prince Ali and Achu and how the seamstresses at the palace were so skilled and professional, and she started talking about how arrogant amateur sewers can be. I know the Prince Ali stuff was a lie, but I feel like the rest of it was aimed at me." Marinette bit her lip. "I'm not arrogant, am I?" Adrian shook his head without any hesitation. "You're the least arrogant person I've ever met, and you've got plenty you could boast about, but you don't. It obviously came with the territory of her being Ladybug." She did so much for this city, and apart from a simple thank you, he and Marinette had never asked for anything else. If Chloe was Ladybug, Adrien had no doubt she would demand a whole list of things. But Marinette kept to herself. You could boast about winning my father's competition, or your parents' bakery, or how you have the school's record for being the most consistently late students. Marinette laughed at that, and he couldn't help but smile. But you don't, he continued. Lila is the arrogant one, having to make up all of these lies to make herself feel important. But why did you wait until now to tell me what had happened? The joy from Marinette's face disappeared and she shuffled her feet. You're really busy. Marinette, if I'm not at school, I spend the majority of time alone in my bedroom. If you call me, there's an 80% chance I'll pick up. And even if I'm out modelling, I can always take a break to talk to you. I meant what I said. Anytime you can call me. She smiled again. Okay, thank you. And you have nothing to worry about when Miss Bustier is concerned. I know she'll love your gift. Although, I don't know how you managed to embroider a quote onto it. Your hands must be tiny. He gently took one of them in his. He had held her hands plenty of times before when they were transformed, usually to kiss her knuckles, but their hands were always covered by their costumes. He had never noticed just how small her hands were until now. Yeah, I guess they are. Helps with my dad in the bakery for small decorations. It is an odd career choice for him, considering his hands are so huge, he said, still holding Marinette's hand in his. His hands were nowhere near as big as her dad's, but her hand was still small compared to his. You should... Adrien rose an eyebrow. What? She closed her eyes. Come over one day? We can show you how we decorate the cakes. And teach you. He smiled and let go of her hand. He'd made her nervous. I'd love to. One day. Maybe when I'm 18 and allowed out of the house. Marinette opened her eyes and smiled. I'm sure if you told your dad you were having a Mandarin lesson with my mum, he'd let you. She is Chinese after all. Adrien's heart jumped slightly at the chance of going over to Marinette's at the weekend. Not only did her family seem incredibly sweet and kind, but it would also mean he would get to see her too. I'll mention it to him. Come on, we should get to science class. She nodded. I just need to grab my books. I'll meet you there. He hesitated, wanting to offer to wait, but he decided to go. He definitely made her anxious by touching her. It was best to leave her alone for now, but he'd really enjoyed talking to her. He went into the science room, Marinette, Chloe and Sabrina's seats empty. Where were the other two girls? He shrugged and sat down beside Nino. What took you so long, he asked. Did you get locked in the bathroom? No, I was talking to Marinette. You've been doing that a lot recently, dude. Adrien nervously chuckled. Am I not allowed to talk to her? No, you are. You're just spending more time with her. Adrien shrugged. She's nice to talk to. Marinette came into the room then, carrying her science textbook. She smiled at Adrien as she walked by his desk, and he smiled back. Her face went all pink again, and Adrien held back his laugh. She was adorable. Hey girl, Adrien heard Alia say as Marinette sat down. Hey. Adrien wanted to turn around and confront Alia about the way her behaviour changed whenever Lila wasn't around. It wasn't fair on Marinette, but there was no point. Marinette was right. It would make everything worse. Were you talking to Adrien? Alia asked. Yeah. Why are you asking? You've got close with him lately. He's nice to talk to. You should be careful, Alia said. Marinette laughed. Why? What's he going to do? Stab me with his fencing saber? Adrien held back his laugh. The girls didn't know he was listening after all. No, because of Lila. You know how she feels about him. Adrien frowned. What? What's that supposed to mean? Marinette asked. Adrien wanted to turn around and say the exact same thing, but Miss Mendeleev came into the room then and all conversation stopped. Where are Chloe and Sabrina? She asked. Here, miss, Sabrina said as she and Chloe came into the room. The blonde girl was smirking at Marinette as she walked to her seat, and Adrien narrowed his eyes. There was something going on. He didn't have long to wait to find out what. As soon as science finished, they all went back to their lockers to get their presents for Miss Bustier, then went into her classroom. Happy birthday, they all chimed as they entered, and she gave them each a smile. Thank you. Oh, you got me presents. You know you didn't have to. We know, Milan said, but you're always here for us when we need you. Miss Bustier's smile widened. Then thank you very much. Who shall I open first? Marinette's, Kim said. You're going to love it. The rest of the class shouted their praise, and Marinette blushed from it. Adrien was glad they all appreciated her hard work, but he couldn't help but feel frustrated. As soon as Lila was around, they all turned against her. Her powers of manipulation were truly something else. Marinette stood up from her desk and went down to the front and handed their teacher a small box. "Happy birthday, Miss Bustier." "Thank you, Marinette." She removed the lid and let out a small shriek, but quickly covered it with a smile. "Oh my, this is wonderful!" Marinette gasped when she saw the cosmetics purse, and from this angle Adrien could see it too. Someone had taken a marker and drawn all over his lady's hard work. He clenched his fists, feeling himself get angry on her behalf. With all of her responsibilities, Marinette more than likely didn't have very much time to do what she enjoyed in between being Ladybug, school, and homework. He knew how much she loved making things, and for someone to do this was awful. He forced himself to calm down, though. One of them needed to keep a cool head, and he could already see the tears gathering in Marinette's eyes. "Miss, it's not supposed to look like that. I don't know what happened. I'll make you another one." Their teacher smiled. "You don't have to. I love this." "No, you deserve a much nicer present than this." Chloe huffed. "This is definitely what you deserve, Du Pencheng." Marinette glared at the blonde girl. "You did this? So what if I did?" Miss Bustier smiled. "Then I love it even more. Every time I look at it, I'll be reminded of both of you." "But miss, she destroyed it. Aren't you going to punish her?" Miss Bustier just smiled at Marinette. "Let's go outside, Marinette." Tears still in her eyes, Marinette gave Chloe one last look before she sighed, resigned. "Fine." With one hand on Marinette's back, Miss Bustier led his lady out of the room, and as soon as the door had shut, Adrien got out of his seat and went over to Chloe. "That was uncalled for and you know it." Chloe laughed. "Calm down, Adriekins. I was just teaching her a lesson." "For what? She commented that you'd never brought a present." "She wasn't being rude. She was stating a fact." Chloe just smirked. "Okay. And? What if she gets akumatized because of you?" She rolled her eyes. "Why do you care about her so suddenly?" "It's not sudden. I've always cared about her," Adrien said. "I heard your conversation with her in the locker room. I'm not stupid." He just glared at her. Right now, he was confused about what he felt for Marinette. He definitely did care about her, and he looked forward to seeing her every day, but he wasn't sure what else. He didn't want to think about that now, though, not when Marinette might be about to get akumatized, and he didn't want to continue this conversation with Chloe when the rest of the class were listening. "I'm going to see if I can help," Adrien said, ignoring Chloe, and went over to the door. He opened it, finding that Marinette was nowhere to be seen, but Miss Bustier was there, wearing a very odd outfit. It could only mean one thing. He swiftly shut the door and turned to his classmates. "Miss Bustier has been akumatized," he said. Alia sighed as she stood up. "Okay, here we go, people." "You look ridiculous," Plag said, swallowing down another hunk of camembert. Adrien just rolled his eyes at his Kwame in the mirror. "Thanks, Plag." It was Paris Fashion Week, and today was the day of his father's show, so, of course, he was modelling for it, although he wasn't the biggest fan of his all-black outfits. Marinette would be arriving soon with his hat, which would bring some much-needed colour. His cheeks coloured up as he thought about her. Apart from his Ladybug, he didn't know when the last time he saw her outside of school was. "You're too obvious," Plag said. "What are you talking about?" "Your crush on Marinette?" Adrien's blush got worse. "I'm not sure if I do have a crush on her." "You're doing a good job pretending you don't, then." Honestly, Adrien was still unsure. Whenever he saw or thought about Ladybug, his heartbeat would speed up, like it always did, and now it was doing the same for Marinette. But he wasn't sure if that was truly because he had feelings for her. But the more he spoke to her, the more she got used to being around him, and the more she came out of her shell. She was acting more Ladybug-like around him every day. Maybe he really was falling for her. Someone knocked on the door of his trailer then, and Adrien went to answer it, revealing Natalie and Marinette. He couldn't stop the smile that took over his face at the sight of her. "Hi, Marinette." "Hi," she said, no stutter in her voice. "Could you leave us, Natalie?" His father's assistant looked between them for a moment before she nodded. "You have 5 minutes until the show starts." Adrien smiled in acknowledgement and Natalie left. "Come in," he said, holding the door open. Hat box in hand, Marinette climbed up the steps, but tripped on the last one. The box went flying, but Adrien ignored it in favour of grabbing Marinette by the arms before she could fall over. "You okay?" he asked as he helped her to stand up. "Yeah, I'm just nervous. It's my first fashion show." Adrien smiled. "I was nervous for mine too, but you've done all the hard work. It's up to me to make your work look good. Which shouldn't be hard. The hat is amazing, and I'm a good model. And you're so modest too." Adrien smiled. She really was more comfortable around him. Marinette went over to grab the hat from where the box had fallen and opened, and she gasped. The feather came off. Can you fix it? She nodded, and still sat on the floor, she opened up her coin purse and took out a travel-size sewing kit. I was worried something would happen, and I was right. It's a sign that today is going to go awfully, and Audrey Bourgeois is here, and your dad will be watching, and my parents are here too, and Marinette, Adrian said, cutting off her anxious ramble. It's going to be fine. Things like this happen at fashion shows all the time. A model steps on the train of a dress and it rips, or necklaces get stuck in lace shirts. This is normal. And you've got time. Natalie said I have 5 minutes. I'll deal with Natalie, he said with a smile, watching as she calmed down. Take all the time you need. She nodded and set to work, pulling out a needle and thread, and Adrian sat down opposite her, watching as her deft fingers quickly reattached the feather to the ribbon. She really was amazing. Maybe he could suggest to his father to offer her a designing internship over the summer. That way she would be around the mansion most days and they could have lunch together. He would absolutely love that. But he knew his father would say no. There was no point in asking. You really are good, he said. You sound surprised. Well, I knew you were good, but I'd never seen you sew until now. I guess it really is a good job you have small hands. She didn't look up at him, but he could see her smile. Thanks, Adrikins. He made a fake gagging noise. Do not ever call me that again. Marinette giggled. But I'm still not sure it's good enough. Chloe's mum said glitter is in fashion, and there's none on your hat. Well, why would there be? It's inspired by pigeons, right? How many pigeons have you seen covered in glitter? Marinette glanced at him through her eyelashes. Wouldn't you like to know? Adrian couldn't help but laugh. She was flirting with him now, right? He'd never imagined Marinette would ever flirt with him. Okay, there, she said, packing away the needle and thread, the feather now firmly reattached. Try it on. He picked the hat up and placed it on his head. How do I look? Good. Adrian narrowed his eyes. Just good? Marinette's entire face went pink. You don't need me to tell you how handsome you are. I think I do. I didn't know you thought that about me, Marinette, he said with a smirk. Still blushing, she rolled her eyes. Oh, shut up, Agrest. He laughed again, and then there was another knock at the door to the trailer before it opened. Adrian, it's time, Natalie said. You're going to crease your clothes. The two teenagers stood up now. Sorry, Natalie, Adrian said before he turned back to Marinette. I reserved a seat for you in the front row. Only the best for you. She smiled. Thank you, Adrian. No, thank you for designing something amazing. I hope I get to wear something else of yours in the future. He stepped closer to her, about to ask if he could give her a hug. Then he noticed a stray eyelash on her cheek. He gently touched it with the tip of his finger, and it transferred to him. Make a wish, he said, voice quieter so Natalie couldn't hear. Marinette's blush got even worse, but her pretty bluebell eyes went wide as she stared at him. When he didn't move his finger and she saw he was serious, she closed her eyes to think for a moment before she reopened them and blew the eyelash away. What did you wish for, he asked, voice still low, as he lowered his hand. She smiled at him. It won't come true if I tell you. Adrian, Marinette, we have to go. They broke eye contact and went over to the trailer door. I'm ready, Adrian said. Natalie nodded and they followed her in silence to the audience entrance. Your seat is between your mother and Alia, Natalie told Marinette. Thank you. Good luck, Adrian. He smiled in thanks, and when Marinette had gone, his father's assistant turned to him. Are you and Marinette? She's just a friend, Adrian said, although he wasn't sure that was how he felt about her. Well, they were friends. They weren't dating or anything. It's not like he lied to Natalie, but he definitely thought he had a crush on her at this point. But he was still worried he was projecting his feelings for Ladybug onto her. But now, after she had got more comfortable around him, to Adrian, there was no visible difference between Marinette and Ladybug. Adrian didn't bother to question why his father was letting him go to the park for the Heroes' Day picnic Marinette was hosting. Both he and Natalie looked a little washed out. He guessed it had been possible his father had been reacclimatized into the collector. He probably should have stayed to check they were okay, but they seemed like they didn't want to be disturbed. And he wasn't going to pass up on an opportunity to see Marinette. She had been absolutely amazing in that fight. Everyone had turned on them, so they'd gone into the sewers and jumped off the edge of the tunnel, eyes closed, transforming in midair. If you had told him a couple of months ago that he would have been doing that with Marinette Dupencheng, he wouldn't have believed you. But now, when he looked at Marinette, he knew she was the bravest person he'd ever met. He ran practically all the way to Place des Vosges, and all of their class, apart from Lila, were already sat in a collection of picnic blankets, food spread out around them. Marinette was sat down, munching on a cookie, a content smile on her face. Adrian smiled at the sight of her, his heartbeat starting to quicken. He was in love with her. There was no doubt about it now. She looked up, sensing his stare, and waved to him, her smile even bigger. She didn't even look tired after that fight, and the way she'd handled Hawkmoth, amazing. She really was the girl of his dreams. He walked over and sat down beside her. "Hey," he said, taking a cookie from the plate in front of her. "That was crazy, wasn't it?" Adrian paused, cookie halfway to his mouth. What was? Did she know that he knew who she was? How could she know? The Red Akumas? Oh, yeah. Insane. Alright, you don't need to sound so sarcastic about it. Marinette bit her lip. You didn't get hurt, did you? No, all thanks to Ladybug. A small blush illuminated his lady's cheeks. And Cat Noir. Of course, we can't forget him. Adrian smiled again. A lot of people forgot about Cat Noir, but not Marinette. Never his lady. Thank you. She tilted her head, confused. Why are you saying thank you? People usually forget him, but not you. You never forget anyone. You make sure everyone is included, even if it means you might miss out too. You're kind to a fault, and you don't let anyone stop you from doing what's right. You're our everyday Ladybug. Marinette's blush got even worse, and she was smiling at him, but then she shrugged. I could never be like her. Tiki really was right. Marinette thought of herself and Ladybug as two different people, but Adrian was only in love with one girl. I meant what I said. You're exactly like her. He leant over and kissed her gently on the cheek, and he couldn't help but smile at the small gasp that escaped her mouth. She was too cute. Was now the right time to tell her how he felt about her? He didn't think so, not when they were surrounded by the rest of their class in a park. When he did it, he wanted it to just be the two of them. What was that for? Marinette asked when he pulled away. The stutter made it obvious she was nervous, but she was smiling. He hadn't made her uncomfortable. He just smiled back and started to eat his cookie. One day, she'd find out he was Cat Noir, and then she'd understand. Adrian took out his headphones when Marinette came to sit with him. They were on the train heading to London, and Nino had gone to talk to Alia, so Marinette had switched seats with him. You okay? He asked as she sat down. She looked exhausted, and it was no surprise. There had been an Akuma attack really late last night. He was tired too, but it wasn't really showing on his face. He knew how much Marinette valued her sleep, judging by how late to school she usually was. Just tired. I was up early helping my dad in the bakery. Me too. Marinette glanced at him with narrowed eyes. You were up early helping my dad in the bakery, were you? He laughed nervously. Just that I was up early, not for my dad. Or for baking. I don't think he knows how to do that, actually. He smiled then, imagining his father wearing an apron. Adrian doubted his father had ever baked in his lifetime. You should have a nap. We won't get to London for 2 hours. It had been a while since he'd been to London, but he loved the city and he wanted to have fun with Marinette there. But she wouldn't have much fun if she was tired. What if I snore? Why does it matter if you snore? In case it sounds weird and I disturb everyone. Adrian chuckled. If it sounds weird, I'll wake you up. Thanks, she said with a smile. She leant back in her seat, and once she was comfortable, she closed her eyes. He watched her for a moment, checking she was all right, and then a very soft snore escaped her mouth, and her fringe fell onto her eyelids. He really couldn't help the smile that overcame his face as he gently moved her hair to one side so it wouldn't disturb her. She was adorable. Adrian leant back in his seat then and closed his eyes. It wouldn't hurt him to have a nap as well. He was pretty tired too, and they had a long day ahead of them. His eyes had been closed for a grand total of 5 seconds when he felt something softly thump against his shoulder. He glanced down and smiled again when he saw Marinette's body had made the unconscious decision to lean against him. Part of him wanted to wrap his arm around her and bring her closer, but that would probably freak her out when she woke up. He was content to nap with her like this. He closed his eyes again and leant against her a little too. He had never seen his lady be so quiet. In class, Marinette was always whispering to Alia, and out of class he could always hear her laughing with her friends, and when she was Ladybug, she always had something witty to say. It was nice to be with her like this, the two of them completely silent as they rested. He wasn't sure if a couple of months ago she would have been brave enough to sleep around him at the risk of doing something embarrassing while she napped. But since he'd opened his eyes in the storage container, they'd come a long way. Adrian was happy he'd been given the chance to be able to fall in love with all of Marinette's. What are you doing, Lila? Adrian resisted the urge to open his eyes at the mention of that girl's name. He stayed still, listening in on the conversation. I don't feel well, so I thought I'd ask Marinette if she had anything to help. I feel dizzy when I travel. Adrian rolled his eyes underneath the lids. She was so bad at lying. It really was a wonder the others hadn't figured her out yet. I'm sure we can find you something in the meantime, Alia told her. Marinette's really tired today. She needs to sleep. And Adrian doesn't look the greatest either. He suppressed the urge to smile, glad that Alia was finally standing up for Marinette in a way. I know, Adrian recognised the voice Lila was using. It was her faking she was upset. What was she going to lie about now? What is it? Alia asked, the concern in her voice real. I really like Adrian. You know I do. And so does Marinette. I wouldn't ever want to say anything bad about her. But I feel like she might just be trying to get close to Adrian to hurt me. He's too nice to say no to her. And it's working. You told me that he even kissed her on the cheek on Heroes Day. Alia sighed. I'm not sure Marinette would do that, Lila. But she is doing. Ever since I've arrived at school, she's been getting closer and closer to him because she knows how I feel about him. You told me when I started at DuPont, she and Adrian didn't speak that much. And now they're napping together. She's really upsetting me, and this will hurt Adrian too when he finds out that she's just using him. Adrian had to try extremely hard not to stand up and start shouting at Lila. How dare she say any of that? Marinette was one of the kindest people he knew, and he knew that no matter how she felt about him, she would never try to turn him against anyone else. He was certain if Lila really told Marinette she had feelings for him, then she would have stepped to the side and resigned herself to not being with him, and almost everything that had happened between them was because he had instigated it. If he was going to wait for Marinette to start talking to him, then he'd still be waiting. He had wanted to get to know her better, so he had been the one to start talking to her more, making her feel less nervous around him, encouraging her to speak up. How dare Lila interpret all of that as Marinette being manipulative? Although he was sure Lila wasn't seeing it like that. She was seeing that Adrian was developing feelings for Marinette, and Lila was jealous because it wasn't her he was in love with. And now she was trying to get Alia to turn even further against Marinette. This was a new low, even for Lila. Oh, Lila, we won't let that happen. I'll talk to Marinette when we get back to Paris. I won't let her do this to you. Lila sniffed, as if she was on the verge of non-existent tears. Thanks, Alia. You're a true friend. Marinette doesn't deserve you. Thankfully, the conversation ended there, and Adrian opened his eyes slightly to look down at Marinette. She was sound asleep, and he was happy she had heard none of that. How anyone could think this amazing girl would do something like that was beyond him. Alia and the others would be sorry when they found out what Lila had been doing. Adrian was barely holding it together. He was so angry. He was beyond livid at this point. After what Lila had said on the train, Alia had obviously spoken to Marinette, and no matter how many times Adrian had tried to talk to her, she would end the conversation quickly. She had found out Lila apparently had feelings for him, and as he predicted, Marinette moved aside to leave the way open for Lila, no matter how sad it made her. He reasoned it was because of the way Lila was treating her, and if she didn't step aside, Lila would have been even more relentless. But that hadn't stopped Adrian. He took every opportunity he could to speak to her in class and at break, and he'd text her constantly too, to let her know he was there for her. He got to see her almost every day as Ladybug, but she acted very differently around Cat Noir compared to Adrian. It wasn't the same. He loved both sides of her, but it was sad that Marinette was talking to him less because of Lila. Since Mr. Damocles had been akumatized, he'd seen Marinette grow in confidence around him, and even though he saw her nearly every day, he missed her. She was kind and clever and funny, and she could even make him blush with some of her flirting. And now Lila was trying to take that away from them. This morning had been the final straw. He knew Marinette would never steal the answers to the test, or take anyone's necklace, or push someone down the stairs. It was beyond him how anyone could think she would physically hurt someone at all, let alone push them down an entire flight of stairs. And then Marinette almost got akumatized, and then thrown out of school? It was so hard for Adrian not to get angry. The way she was being treated was awful, and none of her so-called friends stood up for her. Alia had just stood in the locker room, watching all of it unfold, then went to comfort Lila, scowling at Marinette as she did. He'd gone straight to his lady, but her parents had let her out of the school before he could ask if she was okay or give her a hug or reassure her in some way, and now he didn't know when he'd get to see her again. The car pulled up on the banks of the Seine, and Natalie made eye contact with Adrian in the rearview mirror. "Are you okay, Adrian?" He nodded, but his face probably gave away how he was actually feeling. "I'm fine." He got out of the car before his father's assistant could ask anything else, but when he saw someone else sat on the chairs by the bridge, he nearly turned around and got back in the car. Lila. Adrian clenched his fists out of reflex before he took a deep breath. Marinette had nearly been akumatized today. They couldn't go 2 for 2 and him nearly get akumatized too. He had to stay calm. "Adrian," Vincent called when he spotted him, and the blonde model forced a smile to his regular photographer. "How have you been?" "Good, thank you. You?" "Wonderful. And we have a fellow Italian with us today. She's famous and she's your father's new muse. Mr. Agreste said you go to school together." Adrian gave Vincent a tight smile. "That's right. His father's new muse?" He and his father didn't talk much, but he found it hard to believe he had picked some random teenage girl he barely knew to be his new muse. Surely his father wouldn't be fooled by all of her lies? He couldn't do anything about why she was here right now, but it gave him a unique opportunity to talk to her away from all of her supporters. "Actually, do you think I could talk to her alone for a moment? I'll need to go over with her what it's like modelling for Gabriel. My father has very specific standards, and this will mean we won't have to reshoot." "Of course." Vincent and the makeup artist walked down the bank a little, and Adrian sat in the other chair, which had thankfully been placed far enough away from Lila. "Hi, Adrian," she said, as if nothing had happened earlier. If Marinette truly had pushed her down the stairs, she would have been too injured to do much, but now the bandage around her leg was gone. "Hello, Lila," he replied, trying his best to keep his emotions in check, which was easier said than done, because all he wanted to do right now was throw her in the Seine for everything she had done today to hurt the girl he was in love with. "What's wrong?" she asked, noting the obvious tension in his voice. "You know what's wrong. What you did to Marinette." "I didn't do anything to Marinette. I didn't make her steal the test answers or my necklace, or push me down the stairs." Adrian stared straight ahead at the houses on the opposite bank. He could hear the smirk in Lila's voice as she spoke, and if he saw it on her face, he wasn't sure what he would do. "You and I both know Marinette would never do any of those things. She works hard for her grades, she doesn't steal, and she doesn't hurt people. Why are you defending her?" "Because she's my friend." Lila laughed. "No, she's not just a friend to you anymore. I've seen the way you look at her." "So?" Adrian asked, his jaw clenched. His classmates had definitely noticed him and Marinette spending more time together, but he didn't think any of them would be able to work out what his true feelings towards her were. Perhaps most of them hadn't. Nino hadn't really said anything to him about Marinette, but Lila was perceptive, and she had obviously noticed. He should have been more careful when she was around. He was the reason why Marinette had been hurt today. He should have backed off when Marinette did. The only reason she pulled away from him was because she was scared of Lila. He should have realised that him keeping talking to her would have resulted in something like this. It was his duty to protect his lady, and he'd messed up. "You know we're meant to be together," Lila said, the smirk in her voice morphing into a smile. "Stay away from Marinette, or I'll do something worse to her." Adrian clenched his fists. This girl was evil incarnate. All of this, just because he and Marinette had feelings for each other? Why was she so relentless in pursuing a relationship with him and hurting Marinette to get to him? She knew he didn't have feelings for her. Didn't she realise that by hurting the one he did love would only make him hate her more? She more than likely did know that. Lila was many things, but stupid was not one of them. Her plan was probably to force him into a relationship with her under the guise of her no longer hurting Marinette, and hope he would eventually develop feelings for Lila instead if they were made to be together. But that would never happen. The only person Adrian had ever loved was Marinette, and his lady was so much more incredible than Lila could ever imagine. No. No? She sounded surprised. This wasn't going to plan for her. "No," Adrian repeated. "How about this? Stop hurting Marinette, or I'll tell everyone you're a liar." Lila huffed. "They won't believe you." "Oh, they will. And you know they will. You've been targeting Marinette's reputation, not mine. And as soon as I tell everyone what you're really like, you won't be able to get close to me. Because if you convince everyone I'm lying too, They'll all be confused why you're hanging around me if I'm just as horrible as you've told them Marinette is. Adrian smirked then. The problem with Lila was her inconsistencies. You could only be a good liar if you remembered what you had said and stuck to it. She never did, and when someone called her out, she lied again to cover it up. She had forgotten to discredit him too, and everyone would question why she was trying to get close to him if he lied about her. There was no way out for her. How am I supposed to get Marinette out of everything that happened this morning, she asked, sounding annoyed now that she had lost. Oh, I'm sure you'll think of something. You're very creative. Adrian turned to where Vincent and the makeup artist had walked off to, the smile on his face real now. Vincent, we're ready. The photo shoot went ahead as planned, Lila keeping her distance as much as she could, and then Natalie took them both back to school, the two teenagers not saying a word. They walked up the steps of DuPont in silence, then Adrian turned to Lila with a smile. Don't you need to go and see Mr. Damocles? She just huffed and marched straight up to his office. Then Adrian sat down, nervously waiting. It was still lunch break and Kim was leading a game of basketball, but Adrian wasn't interested in joining in. He kept his eyes on the entrance to the school, and 5 minutes later, to his relief, Marinette and her parents walked into the school. He was too far away for Marinette to have seen him, and by the looks of things, she was still fairly upset. But hopefully that would change soon. He got up and waited by the stairs that led right up to Mr. Damocles' office, and Alia, Alex, Rose, Mylène and Julika were hovering nearby too. Why do you think Marinette is back? Rose asked. Probably to apologise, Alex said. Alia rolled her eyes. She'll never apologise to Lila. Adrian held back from giving Alia a piece of his mind. He had to stay calm. For his lady. He tuned out the rest of their conversation, and after what seemed like half an hour, but was probably only 10 minutes, Marinette, her parents, and Lila all emerged from the office. Marinette stayed upstairs with her parents for a moment, but Lila came down the stairs straight away, looking upset. What happened? Alia asked, wrapping her arm around Lila's shoulders. She sniffed, on the verge of fake tears. Marinette, she threatened me. She said if I didn't tell Mr. Damocles that I'd lied, she'd hurt me even more. I had no choice. The girls all hugged Lila as she started to cry and Adrian clenched his fists. Lila had technically done as he'd asked, and this was obviously her revenge. Don't worry, Lila, Mylène said. We'll protect you from her. Definitely. Wherever you go in school, one of us will always be with you. Lila wiped away her tears and smiled. Thank you. You're all such wonderful friends. Truly. Adrian had had enough, and he marched over. Lila. 1 second, guys, she said, breaking away from them. What are you doing? Adrian whispered, barely holding back from screaming at her. I did as you asked, but you said nothing about lying about her to her friends, she whispered with a smirk. If I can't have you, then she can't either. Marinette came down the stairs then, a huge smile on her face, but it faded when she saw how Alia and the others were looking at her. What's wrong? His lady asked. Alia shook her head. I can't believe you've done this. Done what? Threatening Lila, Mylène exclaimed. What? I never... Don't bother, Julika muttered. Marinette wouldn't do that, Adrian said, coming to her defence. And you know she wouldn't do that. Lila sniffed again, about to bring back the fake tears. Marinette's manipulated him too. I don't know how. Julika wrapped her arm around Lila and Alia went over to Marinette. You disgust me. Marinette didn't even bother to try and defend herself. She just stood there, tears filling her eyes. Then the other girls turned around and escorted Lila to class. As soon as they were gone, Adrian walked over to Marinette and hugged her without any hesitation. She clung to him, her fists grabbing his white shirt, and he could feel her shaking as she tried to hold back her tears. I didn't do anything, she said, her words mumbled against his chest. I know, he said, holding her tighter. Had he made the situation worse? Maybe. But if he hadn't done something, then Marinette wouldn't have been allowed back at school. Maybe her going to another school would have been for the best. But like Alia and the other girls had vowed to protect Lila, he would do the same for his lady. Marinette, I know you want to cry right now, but if you don't calm down, you're going to get akumatized, okay? He waited, arms still around her, until she stopped shaking. Then she pulled away from him. Her eyes were all red and so was her face. She wasn't okay by any stretch of the imagination. Maybe you should go home for the rest of the day. Start fresh tomorrow. Marinette shook her head. If I do that, then she's won. I can't let her win. Adrian smiled. Seeing his lady like this was a shock. She was never upset. She was always so happy. But she was still in there, fighting. Okay, let's get to class. They went upstairs together, and when they entered their classroom, some things had changed. Nino was sat in his usual spot, Lila was in Alia's, and Alia in Marinette's, presumably so Marinette couldn't hurt Lila when she walked up the aisle in the middle. Apart from Chloe and Sabrina, the rest of the class looked sufficiently annoyed when they saw Marinette, and with her head bowed, she walked up the aisle and went all the way to the back, sitting at the seat beside the windows. Adrian glanced at his seat, then up at the empty seat by Marinette, and his heart did the decision-making for him. Before he even knew what he was doing, he was walking up the stairs towards her and sitting down beside his lady. He had made the right choice, despite how the class were now murmuring to each other about them. Marinette turned to him in surprise. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. They'll all say nasty things." Adrian shrugged. "Let them. He could take it, she couldn't, so he'd take it for both of them. Besides, it's just a seat." Marinette found his hand under the desk, where nobody could see, and squeezed it. "It's more than that." The action alone made Adrian blush, but he squeezed her hand back. "I know you'd do the same for me." Miss Bustier came in then, immediately registering the seat reconfiguration. "Nathaniel, why don't you come down and sit by Nino, even things up a bit?" "Are you okay at the back, Adrian and Marinette?" The model smiled. "Yes, miss," he said, squeezing Marinette's hand at the same time. "All right, tablets and history textbooks out. French Revolution time." Adrian let go of Marinette's hand so they could get the right things out of their bags, but as soon as everything was on the desk, Marinette reached for his hand again. "I'm sorry, Adrian smiled. "Don't apologise. Take what you need." Marinette returned his smile, and they held hands beneath the desk until school ended. Adrian knew this wasn't a romantic thing. Right now, Marinette needed comforting. She'd had a traumatic day. She'd been thrown out of school, seen a sentimonster of herself, and now all of her friends had left her. Even if everyone abandoned him too, he would not abandon her. As Andre prepared the ice cream, Adrian watched Marinette. She was sat on the edge of the bank, legs dangling over, vacant stare focused on the river. It had been a difficult fight, and they'd won, but they'd lost Master Fu. Adrian was sad, but he'd never had all that much interaction with him. Marinette was feeling it more than him. From what Ladybug had said, the man had seemed like a grandfather to her, as well as a friend and mentor. And now he was gone, and Marinette, who had already lost all of her friends but Adrian, was now the guardian of the miracle box. And on top of that, she blamed herself for what had happened. And while it technically had been her fault, it had been a genuine mistake. And now she was beating herself up for it. Andre saw where Adrian was looking and he frowned. "She is upset. Ice cream to cheer her up, no?" Adrian nodded, a sad smile on his face. He was sure more than ice cream was needed to make his lady smile again. But it was a start. The battle with an akumatized Chloe had ended an hour ago, and Ladybug had gone to investigate the key Master Fu gave her. He didn't know anything more about it, but he suddenly got a text from Marinette asking to meet him, if he was allowed of course. His father nor Natalie had been around, so Adrian had just walked out of the house and went to where Marinette had said she would be, just as Andre had pulled up with his cart. He waved at Marinette, then pointed at the cart, to let her know what he was doing, and she had just nodded, her face blank. Andre didn't rhyme as he put the ice cream together, realising his customer wasn't in the mood, and handed Adrian the green, pink and blue dessert with a smile. "I hope you both feel better soon." "Thank you, Andre." Adrian climbed down the steps and walked along to where Marinette was, sitting beside her on the bank. "I thought ice cream would help," he said. "You looked sad when I got here." She nodded. "I'm not having a great day." And then there were those wasps. It looks like Hawkmoth got close to winning. Adrian smiled. "I'm sure Ladybug won't let him get that close again." "I hope so," she said. She sounded so tired. He wanted to walk her home and make sure she slept for a week. She needed it. And things were only going to get more stressful from here. And what made it worse, Marinette didn't look upset right now. She didn't look like she was about to burst into tears. She just looked like she felt numb to everything, like she wouldn't even register how cold the ice cream was if she ate it. It was like she was shutting down. "You should have faith in Ladybug," Adrian said. "She's amazing, and so are you. You need to believe in yourself. It's kind of hard when everyone thinks I'm a liar and you're the only friend I have left." "I'm the only friend you need," Adrian said, starting to eat the ice cream. "Oh yeah, you going to come over and have sleepovers with me?" she said, smirking slightly. That was his lady. I think my father might have something to say about that, but I can do everything else." Marinette took the other spoon out of the ice cream and started to eat. "Including telling me about all the boys you have a crush on?" "Absolutely. I'll have you know that I think Luca is kind of cute." Spoon close to her mouth, Marinette laughed, smearing some of the ice cream on her cheek. Adrian wiped it away with his thumb for her, and she smiled at him, the light returning to her eyes. She would be okay. It would take some time, but as long as he was here for her, his lady was going to be okay. She is upset. She is upset. Ice cream to cheer her up, no? She is upset. Stop just saying normally.